Okay.
Very personally, all the care and prayers and help and stuff involved in recuperating from my knee surgery.
Hard work at the Switch Committee.
Just the generosity of everyone's prayers and support for our family.
All the new faces that I see in the congregation that I don't know.
Well, I'll say something about my own parish and then quickly about yours. Every second Sunday, we have in the parish hall, we make sack lunches for the, and so every second Sunday we make over 400 lunches. In the afternoon, they're delivered directly to those people. And for you, it was reading through the results of the CAT survey. I can't wait to share them with you because they are something to rejoice about.
Cool. I see God work here every day, mostly through email.
Is he emailing now?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Cool.
No, emails that come in from people that say, you know, a visitor. I felt so welcome. I want to get involved in this. Those are great things. Well, why don't we pray together and offer up all these thanksgivings to God, and then I'll hand it over to Susan. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Oh, Father, we thank you for this beautiful day you've given us, for your kindness, your generosity towards us, as we will talk about on Sunday. You are indescribable. We are in awe of who you are and your great love for us that just overflows in ways that are too many to describe. We thank you for Susan and her work with us. We thank you for this search team, for Vestry, all the people who sit around this table tonight, and those who cannot be here who are a part of this process and lead in this parish. We pray that you would make us even more grateful for the things that you are doing here and the things that you do in our lives. We offer up our time together to you tonight, and we pray that you would be pleased with it and that we would be blessed by it. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Well, I've got paper for you.
And don't forget your bags.
And don't forget your driveway. So this is a copy for you of the full report from the CAT survey. I'm going to walk through it almost page by page. I'm trying to keep to my time allotment and allowing you time to ask questions. The cover page is just something that Russ Crabtree puts together just to try to help you understand why I didn't send this report out to you the minute it was prepared. It's the kind of report that is not easily understood by just reading through it and needs some interpretation. I found that if I send it out in advance of this kind of meeting and people read it, they come to some false conclusions. And then I have to undo those false conclusions. So to save us in both annoyance, that's why you're getting it now. But I'm going to forward the electronic version to Steve and the wardens and to Alan, so you have it for your use. Let's jump right into page 4. That is the first overall summation page of the report called Key Indicators. This tool has been around for some 20 years. It's been tweaked and improved over those 20 years. But what it has done through the use with thousands of churches that are now in the database. It's really helped focus in on helped churches across the country understand the key indicators of vitality. And two of the key indicators of vitality are overall satisfaction and overall energy in the congregation. And if you will, this is a tool that we don't use often in churches, this kind of tool, which asks members of the congregation about their experience. I mean, think about how many times in your life that you are surveyed, customer satisfaction surveys. I was just at Dominic's over the weekend, and I was surprised when the checker-outer person at the cash register handed me my receipt. He said, please go online, we'd like you to take the customer service survey. They wanted to know how I felt. Well, churches are probably the last institution on the face of the earth that have decided to ask members of their congregation, how do they feel about it? And this is a tool that does that. So, your data is represented here, and we'll go through your data. It also is compared to the data of churches your size that are in the CAT database. Okay, so you're being compared to some 500 churches that are about the size of St. Peter's. The majority Episcopal, a few Presbyterian and Lutheran. So you not only have your scores, but you have a comparative percentile rank, just so you get a sense of what other churches your size are doing. So the one question in the survey that gets at overall satisfaction is the one listed here. On the whole, I'm satisfied with how things are. 59% clearly agree, 37% on the fence, 5% disagree. This rating of church satisfaction level of average is your comparison to the other 500 in your cohort. So, you know, your average compares, some are better and some are worse. When I see over 30% on the fence, I start to ask myself, I wonder what some issues might be, or are there issues, or are these people just saying, well, I'm satisfied about some things and I'm dissatisfied about others. And we'll learn more about what this 37% might mean as we get into the data. Just for comparison purposes, here's what it looked like in your 2009 CAT survey. 41% clearly agreed, 46% were on the fence, and 13% clearly disagreed. So that's a wonderful shift in the right direction in the last 4 years, or 3.5. You took the CAT survey in September of 2009. Overall energy, the one question that gets at this, and this is where you have to read the data backwards, this question is worded in the negative, so you hope people would disagree. On the whole, it seems like we're just going through the motions, there's not much excitement. 57% disagreed, and you can see the rest. In 2009, it was very similar to the satisfaction. 41% disagreed, 46% on the fence, and 13% clearly agreed. So again, a movement forward in a positive direction. Attendance trends. Compared to 3 years ago, I attend worship or the same or less. You can see 34% attend more. Overall, that's a 5% average just looking at your scores on this one item compared to all the other churches who have done the CAP just this year, you and St. James and West Dundee are the only two that have shown increases. Most of them have been flat. So 5% may not feel like a lot, but it's excellent in comparison to what's going on in the diocese. In 2009, it was 28% more, 57% the same, and 15% less. And at that point, that was showing a 4% increase in attendance. So, and I'll show you some other data that shows the uptick in attendance. The value of activity beyond worship. 63% say church activities are very meaningful to me. The scores for 2009 were 57% agree, 36% on the fence, 7% disagree. Now, what's interesting is even though your percentages are pretty high compared to the other 500, you can see your rating is low. Those folks at those other 500 churches just find more value in the activities going on than you do. You were asked to rank order 17 different priorities, and the question was rated, where would you like to put additional energies if you were to expand your ministries? And these are the top 3. I'll show you all 17 later in the report. Congratulations, you and every other parish have the same first 2 priorities. Basically, let's grow. And then the third one has to do with more opportunities for Christian education and formation for every age. In 2009, the only difference was instead of formation, the third priority was financial giving, was stewardship, which shows up in yours a little more down this time, which is a good sign. You did a great job. 121 people completed the survey, 148% of average Sunday attendance, which means folks who don't attend regularly or maybe new were interested enough to complete the survey. That's as compared to 47 who took the survey in 2009, so that's huge. I think we can honestly say this is a half representation of the congregation. Let's go to page 5. This one takes a tad bit of explaining.
Excuse me, can I ask?
Yeah, please.
I'm fascinated by the little owl with numbers at the top of the page.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. I neglected to tell you about that. Russ Crabtree, who is the creator of all this, has written a book called Owl Sight, and it thoroughly goes into everything that's behind this survey. And the owl refers to the book, and the number next to the owl is the page in the book that just talks about this particular set of data. And I'd be happy to share a copy of the book with you if you're interested. I'll give it to Father Steve. It's a nice resource. Drivers of satisfaction. So this gets at the question of, well, if we wanted to improve satisfaction or energy in this congregation, what are those things that we know that if we tweaked would improve satisfaction and energy? So for this congregation, it is these 5 things listed. And they're listed in terms of how the question of the survey is worded, okay? And so the 5 drivers of satisfaction have to do with this driver 1 is related to trust and vestry and clergy leadership, is what that question is getting at. Driver 2, supporting persons in ministry. Driver 3, the quality and spiritual content of worship. Driver 4, again, it has to do with leadership and how decisions are made and the trust factor. And 5, just the spirit of the congregation makes people want to get involved. So how you can look at these, if these 5 things are happening well, then you go back to your satisfaction score, and if they're happening super well, your satisfaction would be at 100%. You can see on your satisfaction score that 37% are on the fence. So I'm thinking that some people think these drivers are working and happy, and some people are saying, sometimes yes, sometimes no. That's one way you can look at this.
You get a kind of breakdown of like which drivers are happening.
No, it doesn't go into that detail. However, on the right-hand column, where I don't like the way that column is captioned in terms of importance. Really, where it says high, that's really a measurement of the consensus around these 5 drivers in the population that took this survey. So when the rating is high, we can be sure that the majority of people name these 5 as their top drivers. And because they're rated high, you can be sure that if you wanted to improve satisfaction, you would focus on these 5 things because there's strong consensus among the congregation. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Now, energy can have a different set of drivers or the same set. For you, it's half and half. What drives energy, and remember, driver 1, these are the way the questions are worded, but what this really means in terms of driver 1 is that the lower the conflict, the higher the energy. So conflict impacts people's energy in the congregation. The quality of worship impacts energy. The opportunities for members to engage in ministry. The quality of the music program impacts energy. And again, the trust in those who are leaders. Okay? Now, you can see in the column that the consensus is moderate to low. So what's that? That's telling us that there's not strong consensus across the congregation that these are the only 5 drivers. They're the 5 that, if you will, rose to the top in terms of consensus, but it's weak. And so I can't tell you that if you tweak these 5, that the energy level would necessarily go up. It might, because there's some level of consensus, but it's not clear. You might go interview 25 people in the congregation and say, what impacts your energy about, your feeling about the energy around here? And you might get 25 different answers, where if you ask them about their satisfaction, you probably get the same answer over and over. And the drivers are different than 2009. For energy, they're about the same. For satisfaction, there were several drivers around the performance of the rector. And when the rector clearly articulating a vision, the rector helping us achieve our mission, the rector's preaching. And when I see a lot of drivers related to the performance of the rector, then I begin to think that the congregation is fairly rector-centric. And we've talked about that before, that a lot of hope depends on the performance of the rector. And that now none of yours are related to the rector, that there's the likelihood of much more mutuality in ministry and ownership by the entire congregation of what's happening in St. Peter's. And it makes for a much less highly anxious congregation. Congregations are more anxious, even unconsciously, when they're rector-centric because of two things. One, if the rector's performing very well, then you're worried about what happens if he leaves. And if the rector's not performing well, you're worried about how you get rid of this person. I mean, to put it bluntly. And so there's this, maybe unconscious, but there's always this sense of uncertainty, and that doesn't show up this time for you at all. Page 6 is a map that charts energy and satisfaction. And each quartile, but over the 20 years, Holy Cow Consulting and the churches they've worked with have been able to pretty clearly name some of the behaviors and the sense of the culture in those parishes by quadrant. And so the quadrant you are in, which is where I would wish every one of our parishes in the diocese, is called the transformational quadrant. In other words, those churches that are high energy, high satisfaction have proven over the years to be those congregations that transform people's lives, those who are members, and those who are served by those congregations in the community. Here's where you were in 2009. Look at that. I mean, if I could have every congregation I work with be headed in this northeast direction, we would be incredible as a diocese. You'll laugh at this quadrant that you were in last time is called chaos quadrant. Why? Because there's more energy than there is set. This is the energy axis, and this is the satisfaction. There's more energy than satisfaction, and in congregations in this quadrant, there are a million ideas of let's do this and let's do that, and lots of ideas and not a lot of ownership, and congregations spin their wheels, and the satisfaction, because things and programs fall apart or don't take hold, the satisfaction then starts to spin in a negative direction. So I applaud all your efforts in terms of where you come to. And as I like to say, the good news is you're there. The bad news is you're there. And those of you who know organizational life and dynamics, you can't rest on your laurels and expect to stay there.
Are you saying there's no direction to go but down at this point?
There's still a little.
It looked like we're right in the corner, so I didn't know what happened when you got to the corner.
Levi, there's still a little room there. However, I've seen a number of congregations, including my own, that have been in that upper right-hand corner and have gotten complacent and have slid backwards. It's a lesson. Page 7. Critical success factors for improving satisfaction. This data is cut in a way that says, well, if we wanted to improve satisfaction, where might we put our energies? And the two that score the highest for you is the leadership question. And I don't know, I mean, this is where you need to have some conversation. I mean, this particular question is worded in a way that persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. Now, you can interpret that in a number of ways, and this is where I like to say, this is the beginning of the conversation with the congregation. I mean, it begs conversation in terms of, well, tell us what you mean by that. What might the vestry, how might the vestry behave differently or attend to listening to the congregation better that would improve their sense of trust in you? I don't know what it means, but it begs conversation. And the second area is helping people identify their ministry and equipping them and supporting them in their ministry in the church. Those two are the ones that really rise to the top.
Now these percentages, are these,
These are
this is what percentage of people have said they're important?
No, this is a different score. So based on the data behind the drivers, Levi, these are the two that have the strongest consensus for driving satisfaction. So this is just another score or way of saying to you, if you wanted to improve member satisfaction, this is the rank ordering of the list of things you would want to focus on. Okay? And
some of them are connected. Some of them in that top.
right. But again, you don't want to bite off too many things here, and that's where it deserves much more conversation within the vestry. Page 8 is the rank ordering of all 17 of those items that you were asked to prioritize. Here's what I want to call your attention to. It has nothing to do with the rank ordering. It is what it is, and that's where people are. It shows the congregation's interest. What's meaningful to me is on the right-hand column, the mean score. You were asked to rank order these, I think, I'm trying to remember the scale, but anything, and I'll think of it in a minute, but anything that ranks a mean score of 3 or above is highly significant. I took this down to 2.99, so to the 11th priority. Well, here's how I see this. This congregation has said that 11 out of 17 priorities are high priority. 11. And so I read this as just about everything is a high priority, which indicates to me a lack of focus. And if you chose to respond to the congregation, my fear is that you would slide back into the chaos quadrant because you'd be trying to do way too many things at once, and none of them would, you'd have this breadth of things but no depth. And so I think part of the work here with this leadership group and in conversation with the congregation, let's choose one or two and have a depth of exploration and doing rather than 11 big items at once. And it might be interesting to have a conversation with the congregation and just put the 11 out there and just eliminate the last 6 and have them rank order those 11. I don't know, maybe that's even too many, but
This sounds like us doing way too much.
yeah, and you don't want to do way too much.
And is the rank again in comparison to the others, the other 500 churches?
No, well, there is some in terms of where they fall out.
Physical Plan 53 appears to be, while only average in terms of overall rating, is unusually high compared to other churches.
Compared to other churches, right. And just for the sake of comparison, the last 5 on the list were the same last 5 from 2009. So clearly those last 5, this congregation is not too thrilled about over time. Is one way of looking at that. That's just not on their radar. It wasn't in 2009, it isn't now.
Well, you said
The last 5.
are not,
They were ranked 13 through 17 in 2009, just as they are now.
Does that mean we're doing them okay and therefore people aren't worried about it?
I think you're either doing them okay or people are not interested in them now, or it's just not something that matters to them as much as the others. Okay, let's go to page 9. This is one of my favorite pages. It's the top 6 priorities broken out by age group, which I always find interesting. I want you to just do a quick exercise on this page. I want you to put the letter A next to the priorities that are shared by all 3 age groups. The letter S next to those that are shared by 2 age groups. And the letter U, which is unique to that age group. Okay? And if you get frustrated doing it, I'll give you the answers. And maybe because I want to make sure we get through this by 8, I'll give you the answers. How's that? Okay, let me read it to you. So, the first group, AAAUUS. With me? The second group, ASAUAS. And the third group, AAASSS. So one way you can read this is that the 65 or olders, you know, they don't hold any unique priority. They're in agreement with all age groups, or at least another age group. What's interesting is the unique ones, and the under 35, 2 that are unique to them, and they are like every 20 and 30 something across the country. That they are looking for opportunities to form meaningful relationships, and they are looking for opportunities for direct service and outreach. They want to roll up their sleeves and work in outreach. And if you read any of the church research over the last 15 years from the Alban Institute, the Pew Foundation, these are the 2 primary reasons why 20-somethings and 30-somethings would at all be attracted to joining a church institution. Because most of them are not. And this is what they'd be looking for. So, you go back to your top 2 priorities of growth, attracting young people and attracting just more people to the church. You want to pay attention to those 2 unique priorities.
I just posit though that the unique 66 expanding outreach ministries is not that unlike the 64, which is shared in the other 2 quadrants.
No.
I think with age, you just have the pragmatism that to rebuild a community and serve the community, you have to make coalition partners.
Well, no, I mean, they are definitely connected. I think the difference is in 66, it's the ministries that provide direct service. It's they're willing to roll up their sleeves and go serve in a soup kitchen or help build a house for Habitat for Humanity. It's this group that wants to be actively involved in that direct service. And we'll get to the whole demographics page, but the way this breaks out right now for St. Peter's, 28% of the congregation's under 35, about 48% is 35 to 64, and 25% is over 65. And in a minute, I'll show you how that's changed since 2009. What's interesting is the middle age group, what's unique for them is they want to improve the physical plant. You know, they've been here for, you all have been here for a while, and you're saying, come on, let's make this a better place.
Would you find cause for concern in the fact that it's not one of the top 6 priorities for any other age group or not? Or is that a loaded question?
I don't know. I don't find it a concern. I just, you know, the biggest portion of the congregation is in that age group. It's almost 50%. And it's of, you know, it's of that age group to be concerned about those things. I mean, I just think that's part of being that age too. I think you've got to have, it'd be interesting to ask that question in discussion. Let's move forward. I'm going to skip ahead. The next page lists out the priorities by frequent and infrequent attenders. I'm going to let you analyze that just to save some time. I don't find that one as helpful as by age group. Then let's move on to page 11. Page 11 is what explains the bubbles on page 12. So let's go to the bubbles on page 12. This is for those of us who are visual rather than, we like to see pictures rather than words. Listed down the left-hand column are those 17 priorities. Across the top are age groups, the frequency of attendance, and then this back door and front door. Back door are those who have worshiped less than 3 years. Front door, those who have worshiped more than 3 years. The shading of the circles doesn't mean anything. If we had a color printer, it would just be pretty colors. It's the size of the circle. So the bigger the circle, the more important that priority to that group. And as you can see, you know, just based on the first page we looked at, everything is focusing on reaching new people and young families and formation and education. And then the other circle that stands out for me is the one with the 35 and under about developing meaningful relationships. That circle is probably the next biggest.
Susan, is families the strict definition of families, or is it more extended?
Well, the way that, this is a shorthand, the way that the priority is worded is on your first page. Make necessary changes to attract families with children and youth. It's on page 4. That's how it's worded. So you could also look at the music and say those are little dots. Obviously, that's not real important to change right now here. Across the board, small dots. Okay, now let's move ahead. This survey measures 10 different indices. 2 are called descriptive and 8 are called performance. And each index page looks like this. So the first one is the theological index, and just so you just to explain how the page is laid out, the top of the page defines the index. The shaded box are those questions in the survey that measure this index. The next section are your percentage responses to each question. And then the bar chart is your percentile rank compared to your cohort of 500. Okay? So you can see that your theologically progressive. And
And
another word of...
Isn't it fascinating, though, that just a note here, see question number 2, the historic faith is handed down through the centuries. We tend to agree and strongly agree, but yet it's just interesting.
Well, you tend to, your percentages there are, the strongest are in the tend to agree and agree. There's only 11% in the strongly agree. But because there is not a large percentage in the strongly agree, you are seen as more progressive than others. So you're about in the 13th percentile, which says 83% of the churches in your cohort of 500 are more conservative theologically than you are. That's the way you would read that. They must have had a majority of people in the strongly agree on that question. Yeah. The next descriptive index is called the flexibility. This gets at how willing is this congregation to make adjustments, try new programs, change up worship, change up music, change up whatever to meet the needs of the time. And you can see overall leaning toward the more settled. And on the following page is another one of those maps that, again, puts you, so this is and this is flexible or adaptive, and this is settled. And you can see where you are in 2013. Here's where you were in 2009. So
Even more subtle.
no, you're less. No, you were more settled, and I'm very glad that you moved in this direction, because there's an invisible dotted line that's not on your report, but I put it there because over time I've learned, and so has Russ Crabtree, that churches that are this settled have a very hard time changing anything. And those that can't change anything predictably will close. And so Russ calls the progressive very settled those churches in the ICU, and those that are conservative very settled those that are in hospice. And the difference is where you were, because of the progressive theological leanings here, there's a more openness of mind, especially, to at least trying new things and tolerating some of the conflict that causes. On the conservative end of this, theologically conservative congregations have less of a tolerance for differences. And so when change happens in these very settled congregations, it tends to cause a lot of conflict, which then only adds to the difficulties going on in those congregations. And over time, we have seen some of our parishes, especially those that are huddled here, in the last 5 years have closed. Some of ours have closed. It's just as long as the finances have lasted. And so that you've moved in a direction of being more adaptable is to your credit and to your benefit. Now, again, just like in the other map, there's kind of a descriptor of congregations in each of these quadrants. This quadrant is called the Paraclete quadrant, or congregations that are of the Holy Spirit. And let me just share with you some descriptions of congregations like you. At their best, these are communities that are intellectually open, they're reflective, and attentive to ritual. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, at their best, they embrace those of different perspectives, whether it's spiritual, faith perspective, lifestyle perspective, whatever. And they provide the kind of external stability for people who have been hurt by society, by the church, by whatever. And at their best, many congregations who are in the Paraclete, have the personality of warmth and hospitality, many of those churches have purposefully, because that's part of their strength, taken on ministries of healing. Because they're healing places for people who have been broken and hurt by life circumstances or by the church and are looking for a spiritual home. They're less demanding about the particulars of faith, but more clear about the benefits of liturgical tradition. That sounds like St. Peter's to me. They value openness to others. The shadow side of Paraclete congregations, if they lose their mission focus or don't have one, they always retreat into a cycle of the same activity over and over. And then they use the excuse of, everybody's got their own ideas and we accept all that kind of freedom of thought and embracing people who have been hurt by life, and they tend to use that as an excuse for their mediocrity. I don't know if that's true about you, but so as Russ Crabtree puts it, the shadow side of the Paraclete congregations, like that quadrant you're in, he calls them trapped in the onion syndrome when they're at their worst. You peel back layers and there's tons of tears because so many things are going wrong at their worst when they're not mission focused. So anyway, that's a little bit about the descriptor of where you are. The next page is the percentile rank of where you sit with the other indices, which are called the performance indices. And there's a page for each one. But let's just look at these percentile ranks. And I'd like to share with you. So hospitality now is in the 56th percentile. 2009, it was this 37th. Morale is now in the 78th. 2009, it was the 37th. Wow. Conflict management. You want this to be a high score. It means there's not much conflict. So the higher, the better. Last time it was 39. Governance is, I think that is one of the things for you to look at. It's 44th percentile. It was 37. Spiritual vitality, and we'll talk about that in more detail, is at 37 now. And you think that's low, but it's one of the highest in our diocese. And we'll talk about that. Before it was 21. Readiness for ministry is at 38. Just a slight change. It was 41 in 2009.
What does that mean? What's that mean?
It's the
readiness for ministry.
We'll talk. It's do people feel supported in helping them find a ministry in the church?
Okay.
Is someone helping them identify a ministry? are they affirmed in their ministry? And we'll look at the questions that measure that. Then there's engagement in education and formation. You're at 43. Last time it was 15.
Wow, that's an improvement.
And music and worship, you're at 83, and last time you were at 94.
That makes sense too.
So, and now, I don't want you to get freaked out that, well, why aren't we in the 90th percentile in all of these? Now, you have to remember, this is in comparison to the other 500. When you look at your raw scores, they're really quite positive, and I want to go ahead and do that. So the hospitality index, I mean, if you look at some of the questions, our church, number one, our church welcomes and is enriched by people of different walks of life. I mean, look at all the people that are tending to agree to strongly agree. And I think I sense an atmosphere of genuine care and concern, number 4. Again, very strong, but if you look at your percentile rank, it looks low, and that's because probably the other churches you're compared to had more in the strongly agree column, and that's what affects the percentile rank. Is that making sense to everybody? Yeah. So, I mean, overall, if you look at your raw scores, I think you can feel good, and I think there's discussion worthy of how can we improve. Okay. Morale. Just a note, if your eyes go right to the bar chart, you'll see on each page there are certain questions that have an asterisk. Those are worded in the negative. So you want people to disagree, and you want the bar on the chart to be short rather than long. Okay? So, again, the morale scores are, and you can see the difference from a few years ago. These are much, much higher. Conflict scores, the same. And, I don't know how significant this is. The first question, there's a disturbing amount of conflict in our congregation. There's a 14% here that tend to agree. And I would be like, well, what is that? I mean, what is that conflict for them, or what are they sensing? And I don't know if that's significant compared to the rest of those scores, but it might be worth thinking about.
Would that be a question appropriate to ask in small groups, or is that not?
I mean, I think, clarity on any of these questions that are of interest to you as the leaders, I think are appropriate for small groups. Again, this is, to me, just the beginning of the conversation. It gives you hints, and then you can talk to the congregation and get their specific anecdotes that would support this data. The governance scores. Again, here's where, the percentile rank, both 2009 and now, 37 to 44, seems low. If you look at your raw scores, they're really quite good. It's just that they're a little bit more lukewarm than extremely positive about governance here. And I don't know what that is. And again, that might be something for you all to discuss as leaders, and maybe worthy of a question in small groups.
The top 2 box on governance number 2.
Yeah.
Gives me pause.
Yeah. Well, and what's hard, I in some ways, and I'm not trying to,
But it's representative.
yeah, see, right. In some ways.
Who in this room agreed with that question?
Maybe this is my great rationalization for you, but you're not that large of a congregation, and I think this question is hard for smaller congregations because, I mean, it feels like the same small group of people in a smaller congregation. Because a tenth of them are here, it's right.
Isn't there a rule like 20% of people will always do 80% of the work in organizations, at your job, in the church, in the institution?
And not that I want you to just whitewash that one, it might be worthy of conversation, but I have to tell you that in what I've seen in our diocese, the majority of the small congregations have this mixed bag of a response because the vestry represents a good portion of the congregation. So that one's a tough one for small churches. Let's go to the next page, the Spiritual Vitality Index. A couple of things about it. One, these questions are the only questions in the survey that ask about an individual's relationship and is evaluating themselves rather than the congregation, okay? And so this one's related to the degree in which their faith is central in their lives. I want you to know that if you looked at the whole database of 3,000 plus churches, the Episcopal churches always rank lower on this than the Presbyterians that are in this database. I think part of it is just how we think about and express our faith. What's also interesting is I've been fortunate to work with Russ and Holy Cow, and I've worked around the country helping interpret CAT reports in other Episcopal churches in the South and the West. There's a Mason-Dixon line effect. Those Episcopal churches in the South have spiritual vitality scores that are in the 70th, 80th percentile. And I've asked them about that, and they said, well, we're in the Bible Belt, and remember that, and even though we're Episcopalians, we're impacted by the way people talk about their faith.
But even though we're really low on number 3,
Yeah,
there's almost nobody, there's like 0.9% tended to
Yeah.
disagree.
right.
How could you be even more positive on number 3?
Well, an Episcopal, and I'll share an example. Last year, I worked with the cathedral in Oklahoma City. On that question, they had like 82% in the strongly agree category. And that's the difference, is that your agreement is spread from tend to agree to strongly agree.
It's not so much that God is absent up here, it's just he's a little weaker, maybe down in Georgia.
Yeah, and what's really funny is I did a comparison in our diocese and used the diocesan map, and we have a Mason-Dixon line. And it is 90 and Infinity Expressway, and congregations north, and you be one of them, have a lower spiritual vitality score than those in the south part of our diocese.
Well, it is cooler by the way.
Well, the other piece is and we'll see this later. The education level of those north of the Kennedy and east of 294 is much higher. Not only college grads, but the percentage of those in regular graduate degrees. And I think there's this
We don't need God, we have degrees.
You have degrees. Yes, degrees. Now, what's and I don't know what that means. They're just interesting trends. What I do know is that a church can have have a super high spiritual vitality index and be very unhealthy and have low congregational vitality. You can have a lot of people who feel close to God individually, but there's satisfaction and energy about the congregation. So there's no correlation between spiritual vitality and congregational vitality. There is, however, a direct correlation between spiritual vitality and stewardship. The higher the spiritual vitality, the more people live in the church. And we'll see some correlation that yours is jumped up and what it was meant financially. Readiness for ministry. To get at the question, what does that mean? Here are the questions that measure that. Our church does a good job of helping members understand their call. It prepares members for ministry. There are opportunities to engage in ministry. People are supported in ministry. People lay and clergy together, plan and lead worship. And as you can see here, there's a whole lot of people opting out in the middle that tend to agree and tend to disagree. And I think that's why the scores there are low. And that's enough. I mean, what's wonderful here, I like to read it this way, and I think it's the right way of reading. People here are saying, you have me here. Help me find a place. Put me to work on behalf of this parish. That's a great challenge. And I think that's the message here. And it's a great message. It's a great message. And if you'll bear with me and jump ahead to page 26 quickly, it's some of the demographics. I just want you to jump to the education, level of education. This was true of Jennifer's congregation too. I mean, look at how many, they're over 80%, 84% college graduate or above, the majority of graduate degrees. And this is what I said to Jennifer's congregation. This is a classroom of highly gifted children. Any teachers in this room? Any teacher? What happens to a classroom of gifted children who are bored? They act out or they opt out. And so your challenge is you have a classroom of highly gifted children in this congregation. Your challenge is to engage them, and I think through this ministry index, there's the engagement. Help me name my gifts and connect them to a ministry that's meaningful and where I can feel successful and help sick leaders. And you won't have the acting out or opting out. And the acting out may have been what was happening before, and that's why the conflict scores were not so good. That makes me wonder. Engagement and education. Members understand they have a responsibility for lifelong learning and formation. Our church provides opportunities for education and formation in a variety of ways that fit life's complex lifestyles, and that we have high-quality education for every age. Well, you can see that there's a mixed bag on this, particularly question 3. And I know, we've had conversation, I've been, part of your conversation, just talking about everything from Sunday school to when's the best time to do adult formation. I think that continues to be something that, we need to look at. Music and worship, overall, those are just excellent. I think in looking at the data from 2009, the only difference in the worship is that there tend to be more percentage responses in the tend to agree column than the agree or strongly agree. So it's just that it's just a little lukewarm, but I don't know if that's significant to you or not. But that's the difference there. Let's look at the financial piece. Folks were asked to self-report their annual income, and that's the distribution. And then to self-report in dollars their annual pledge. That's the second bar chart. And you can see and where the data comes from in terms of total church income. You were asked to fill out a data sheet for Russ so he could help put this together for you. And you can see what the average pledge is at $1,600. And the average across the church, the Episcopal Church in the United States, is 25. What's interesting is your average household income has greatly increased since 2009. Now it's $94,000. In 2009, it was $78,600. So you've had.
What was our average contribution per household?
That was weird. That was very, I think it was skewed because only 47 people answered that. It was $4,800. I don't think that was right or representative. The average percent of income given is 1.7. Modern tithing's 5, biblical tithing's 10. The average in the Episcopal Church is 2.5. Now, you have far exceeded average on every index in this report except this one. And if I were vestry leaders talking to the congregation, I would say, I dare you to be average. I just dare you to be average. I mean, if you were at 2.5, if you were at the average, you would have any budget issues.
One thing I'll say from the stewardship chairman's perspective is that I think that these numbers are affected greatly by probably the amount of new families and newcomers we have who are not going to pledge, because our pledge numbers are much closer to what you said, the annual average.
Yeah, well, that's good. And it's, and again,
We just have to find these other 54 people.
there you go. Demographic data. You can see the age spread. It hasn't changed. What's changed dramatically since 2009 is the 34 and under. There's 28%. In 2009, it was 9%. Yeah, that's amazing. You're at 48%, 35 to 64. In 2009, that was 67%. 65 and over is 25%, 2009 it was 26%. So they're getting younger. Getting younger. The other thing that's very interesting is look at the tenure. Look at the tenure. I mean, you know,
80%.
yeah. So lots of new people, and you're almost at 50% that are here 4 years and less. So if you feel like you're a newer congregation, you are. You are.
You know what that number was then? That survey?
You know what, I don't think I have that, but I can get it for you, Jason. Levi, I can get that for you. Oh, wait a second. I have it. It was 34% were here less than 4 years. 28% here over 20, and the rest kind of falls out the same. Tenure, those here 4 years and under, in 2009 was 34%, and over 20 years was 28%. Distance from church, for the most part, you're still what I would call a neighborhood church. People don't travel that far to come here, but you do have 30% that travel 5 miles or more, and that's going to impact when you do programming. Like, will people come on a weeknight after a busy day of work? I mean, probably not. And then you have to think of how you strategically use Sunday when people are gathered, right?
And Susan, you know what else is interesting about that? Even though there's a lot more people who took the survey this time, 3 years ago that number was 17%.
Yeah.
5 miles. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll let you study that. I'm a little conscious of the time. Page 27 just looks at a lot of different demographics and activities and compares you and gives you a percentile rank of where you are with your cohort churches. I won't go into that. Page 28 is the data that you provided, Holy Cow, so they can do some of their calculations. I think from your parochial reports.
And I'll just give you a note. If you look at the bottom of the church data form stuff where it says total receipts, that's a little bit misleading. Yeah, that's not total receipts. That is the total pledge receipts. Because remember, a significant portion of the budget comes from interest and other activities. So that's pledge receipts.
Okay.
Just 2012.
Right.
Yes.
Now, I want you to just look at something with me. You'll see that after this page, you're going to see that there are page numbers missing. And I just want you to know, I didn't leave out part of the report, that at this point we've ended the standard portion of the survey, the standard questions. Then you were able to add modules. And because there are page numbers missing means those are the page numbers where other modules would be recorded. And you just didn't use those modules. So here's the interim profile. Very interesting. When you think about the overall strength of the church now as compared to just prior to the resignation announcement of your former rector, would you say, look at that, those scores of stronger and much stronger, 61%. I mean, that's just, I haven't seen during an interim time ever in any CAT results. grow in their interim like you have, and that grow in strength this dramatically. And it's just great. It's just worth applauding and affirming. So kudos to all of you. And
the first question too, I think is important, because what is it, if you total all that up, the leadership is doing a good job communicating during the transition.
yep, you're at,
Um,
you've got 91%.
91%.
Yep.
Feel, you know,
And that's, I think that,
Communication.
yeah, the communication, and that's attributable to, I think, a lot of the positive shift in these scores too, and the lack of anxiety that you felt the last time you went through a transition. The next page is very interesting to me.
Been there, done that? Transitions.
Yeah. This page of critical abilities for the question was, what are you looking for in your next rector? You can see how the responses broke out at the top. I'm just going to shoot to the bottom to look at how that falls out in rank order. Here's what's interesting to me. I look at the rank ordering as it is, and I say to myself, that rank ordering represents what I would call a typical rector at a typical time in the life of our church. That preaching's number one, strategic leadership, that's there, that's great, but that pastoral care is important, but it has been ranked above change management, administration, conflict skills, and being out in the community. Now think about it. The top 3 priorities, the top 2, where we want to grow. So if you want to grow, that means that the congregation's going to keep changing. And with change, you know that can cause conflict. And you know that to grow, you got to be out in the community. And so what I'm saying is, the congregation has said they're kind of looking forward at the new rector, maybe a little bit in that rear view mirror of looking at who they had in the past. Mm-hmm. And this is, most of my words here go to the search committee. Remember where I talked about you getting out on the bow of the ship or up on the balcony and looking beyond the congregation in terms of who you called as the next rector? You need to look beyond this rank ordering and think about some of these skills that have been more lowly ranked. And you might have to say, if we want to achieve the priorities as they're listed, we might need to look at rector candidates who have a bit of a different profile than what the congregation has named. Is that making sense?
I think we need to find whoever put administration as the very least important and make them all serve 3 years on that.
You are Levi, you are a mean man. So something to think about. I just think right now these priorities and your vision for the future, there's a little bit of a disconnect. Not totally, but something to think about. And the last module that you had folks respond to was the strategic planning profile. This one's very interesting to me too. How much change is required to realize your vision for the church? Isn't that a lovely bell curve? No change. It's like every bell curve in a congregation, every question like this in a congregation, you always see like 10 to 15% no, and 10 to 15% yes, and then the rest in the middle. And the good news is the rest of the middle usually go with a yes. And you can see that, the majority of people are saying, some moderate change has to happen. And for the most part, everyone in the middle is saying we've got to change in some ways. Now, here's the challenge, and it comes in the second question. Our church needs to rethink its basic purpose and mission if it's to be effective in the future. Look at the spread of scores on that. And I say, how does that spread, which I find that spread challenging for you, how does that fit with this bell curve where people are saying we need to change? I think you're going to have to go about the articulation of your mission in a very transparent, thoughtful way, because you've got over 50% saying we don't need to rethink it. I'd like to ask them what they think the mission is now.
And whether it's working to
and whether-
achieve the priorities.
Well, exactly, and actually they're saying it has, that the church is in question one. The majority of people have said they think we've been effective in fulfilling the mission, whatever that mission might be. So I think these are some challenging results that deserve more conversation with this leadership group and probably with the congregation. What's wonderful is question 4. There's lots of, I think this is that same group of gifted children. I often feel like I have something to give to the church, but I don't know how to give it. There's, there's 40 to 50% there who say, I don't know how to give it. That's opportunity. That's opportunity in terms of how to put them to work. And finally, if you remember, you had the last section where folks could answer the question, kind of that sense of, wow, that moment, that's what it feels like to be the church. And this is verbatim what people shared, and it's an interesting